You're listening to Enthusiasts, a podcast about the most passionate of passionate people. Link in episode description to check out the back catalog, learn more about the show, and check out my other show, 17 Karat K-Pop. This series of episodes tackles themes including depression, suicide, and substance abuse. Please take care when listening, and know the help is out there. Visit NAMI.org, N-A-M-I. Receive more localized support through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 1-800-662-4357. You could also call to talk anytime to a suicide crisis hotline, 1-800-273-8255. Don't want to call? You can text someone. Get 24/7 crisis counselor support, 741-741. You're listening to a series of episodes about the life and legacy of Tony Hsieh. I highly recommend you check out the past parts of this story if you haven't yet. The link is in the episode description. Enjoy the show! It was also the month he went to go see an old friend, Brock Pierce, campaign for president. That is an interesting aside. First of all, I'm not sure who else remembers, but yet in 2020, a third candidate was running, Brock Pierce, the Brock Pierce, former child star, current crypto enthusiast, co-founder of Mastercoin, and many other things. He got a chief strategist in Akon, the musician, and ran on this America 2.0 tech-focused platform. He got a total of 0.03% of the vote. And in the first place, only earned ballot access in a couple places. But he had been a longtime friend of Tony's. They both connected over this love of Burning Man and some of those hippie-type tendencies and outlooks. He said he and Tony both, quote, don't see the world for what it is, but what it can be, unquote. So if you wanted to look for silver linings, Tony was not fully severing ties with Zappos. He wanted to keep a physical token of that project. And he might have been about to get into political campaigning, maybe a fresh new chapter that might have turned things around. But mid-November, Pierce had a big birthday bash that Tony noticeably did not attend. He was really away, keeping to himself. He later went on to Rachel Brown's place, a former Zappos executive and former girlfriend of his. She let him crash in her New London, Connecticut place with Andy and some others for a bit. He really wanted to escape to this place in Connecticut, in part because he was distraught where he was after his beloved dog Blizzy passed away that November. So ditched his friend's party, dog passed away, isolating himself. That all led to him being in Connecticut, October 29th, 2020. The night before a scheduled flight, Tony got into an argument and ended up going to sleep out in the shed. Probably not just sleep, but use whippets, try to meditate, light a bunch of candles, his usual stuff. But he wanted some space, went to the shed for the night. Court documents later said he had been, quote, stating that he believed he was crystallizing, that he believed he was in a simulation, that he had been chewing cigarettes, and professing, I just don't know what's real and what's not, unquote. Early in the morning, they smelled smoke. That shed Tony was in caught on fire, a fire they would never find the 100% truth about the source of. It was possible the cigarettes, it was possible the candles, the heater, some flammable object in the room, a mix of factors. They also could not rule out either version being intentional or accidental, but a fire started and he had to be pulled out of there to go to an emergency room. And as he was pulled out, his brother Andy took out his phone to film it, which raised a lot of questions later. Some said, well, he was probably wanting to use footage for a documentary he was going to make about Tony's best and worst moments, but not sure if that makes filming him leaving via stretcher better or worse. At just age 46, November 27th, 2020, his family decided to take off Tony's life support. He likely was about to die from all the damage of the prolonged smoke inhalation. And if he did wake up, he really would, cognitively, never be the same. When news got out, besides outrage and finger-pointing and questioning, one of the reactions was true disbelief. Like some Tony followers assumed it was a made-up story to distract from the bad press from his erratic behavior. Some went on like normal. One person later found to have listed on their schedule, quote, priorities this week, getting a quote on wrapping the tree on the patio with LED lights would really add to the space, unquote. That was on the list of priorities right after Tony's death. And many would go on to sue Tony's estate for their piece of his fortune, which was incredibly legally murky because all these deals had been pitched via Post-its. If you have someone sign your contract and it's basically mark a Post-it note, how binding is that? It was a mess. There was also quite a bit of disagreement as to the official net worth of Tony. The official number was estimated at the time of his death of $840 million, but that has kind of been debated. Susie's company filed a creditor's claim for nearly $9 million. Mimi had a suit against him, largely because of the $10 million deal he had given via Post-it note to give her boyfriend documentary funding. There was also a strange figure Tony's estate claimed had sold his property fraudulently for $1 million without proper consent. The title officer's signature was allegedly forged, and the warranty deed for the property lists Santiago Espinosa, someone the estate lawyers claimed they have no knowledge of and never talked to, and this Santiago never had any business that would make him think he had authority over the property. Mark Evansvold of Nacho Daddy pursued $12.5 million from the estate. I could go on and on. Since Tony did not have a will, a judge decided the co-admins for Tony's estate would be his dad and brother Andy. But in July 2022, Richard, his dad, notified the court Andy was no longer a co-admin of Tony's estate. One of the upsides with all the lawsuits was that court documents would clarify a bit more about Tony, who he was, some of the ideas he was thinking of, the ways he wanted to spread happiness that were not brought to fruition but had been in his mind. First of all, the docs do reveal he had been struggling his whole life with social anxiety and depression. They also describe his plans for a Disney World-type theme park where you paid your entrance fee in tarot cards. Then when you were there, you paid in seashells. Like, a certain amount of seashells would get you a souvenir, a drink, whatever. He also considered a boat-bar combination, a geoglobe community, whatever that is. He wanted to build more tree houses. At one point, he seemed interested in an IRL game, basically, like a video game level LARPed. He also hoped that he could get 4 billion with a B people to live by his County Zero values. They were called the County Zero values, and he thought he could spread his message all over the world via hot air balloon screens. He was never satisfied. He wanted to keep making a bigger and bigger impact. Tony's funeral was held mid-January 2021. And due to COVID, it was virtual, but they made the best of it. His mom performed a traditional Chinese dance and sang Think of Me from Phantom of the Opera. He also got a traditional Buddhist ceremony. He actually quoted Buddha at the end of his book. Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The funeral also had tons of speeches from people with many fond memories of Tony. Indeed, the social media outpour of love and compassion definitely showed he left an impact on everyone from fellow Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to politicians to fellow music enthusiasts. His old buddy Alfred Lin wrote a really touching tribute to him in Forbes that ran that December. I'll be quoting directly from it, but skipping around a bit. Your family and close friends are being flooded with messages starting with, I'll never meet Tony, but he's had a major impact on my life. Many of these messages are about your profound contributions to entrepreneurship. But first, I will remember you for your gentle soul and how you gave a part of yourself to countless people. I will remember you for delivering happiness to the world and to me. You even invited competitors who were trying to poach our employees. It was one of those Jedi mind tricks that created confusion. But in the end, those competitors would feel bad whether they took the tour or not. You would invite lots of people to your place to be part of your extended family, especially those without a place to go. Giving thanks and hearing how others gave thanks was also your way of inspiring and being inspired. He ends with a quote from Colin Murray Parks. "The pain of grief is just as much part of love as the joy of love. It is perhaps the price we pay for love, the cost of commitment." A very need the yin to have the yang outlook. The Downtown Project celebrated his legacy with a day called Tony Hsieh Day, complete with artwork, a variety show, live music, and a showcase of art cars, like one he used to dance on top of, joining the dance troupe, the Dancetronauts. He even had his own costume for it, because that was his go-to. So Tony went from saying, "I hope I get to see my best friends on their wedding days because I want to be there to see the happiest days of their lives," to initiating one of their weddings when he was clearly out of it, under the influence, and embarrassed himself. He went from creating a big treehouse in the middle of Container Park to dubbing the room full of his whippets the treehouse. He went from post-it note walls full of possibilities to ones full of favors and sniping. He went from dancing on the car with a troupe to lashing out and being embarrassed when someone wanted him to do his famous moonwalk. Yet he had been relentlessly focused on happiness, yet he had this downward spiral. How did that happen? I've been thinking so much about this, tossing and turning over the paradoxes in the story of Tony Hsieh, the focus on happiness leading to unhappiness, the quest to find the meaning of life leading to a life in some ways going to waste, intellect going to waste, passion projects going unfulfilled, replaced with bad habits. And there are a couple of takeaways I have from this story. One is that I can't help but see parallels to Mr. Beast's story. Mr. Beast, the 25-year-old YouTube sensation, one of the most popular YouTubers, period, around the world. Their stories to me have a couple interesting connections. They both already were flush with cash and hype men at a very early age. Mr. Beast also has this fascination, this urge to make people happy. He loves cheering people up. His brand is colorful, out there, goofy, often family-friendly. His audience is quite young. And his videos can be so tame that they've even aired on a Chinese social media site, despite YouTube being banned in China. But he's all about endless fun for himself and others. He's had massive stunt videos like a human version of Squid Game, big cash prizes for contestants in his games. He goes on huge trips with his friends, does a bunch of weird stunts, has a habit of never reusing a set, so money's not an object. He has a side channel called Beast Philanthropy that does things in massive amounts, like distributing $30 million worth of food that was going to go to waste, rescuing 100 dogs, giving away 20K shoes, planting 20 million trees. That one actually was concrete good, done by his fans per his request. Collectively, they planted 20 million trees. Any money he gets from Beast Philanthropy videos, that's sponsor money he gives to charity. He famously does not use titles like boss, employee, leader of this or that, manager of this or that. He calls his employees all just FOFs, friends of friends. One former staffer told Time magazine, quote, "Jimmy gets uncomfortable and gets angry when people use language like PA because it's too industry," unquote. He also, though, likes to do away with some things that he calls too industry, like responsibility for safety concerns. People who work for him have reported fear over NDAs, OSHA protocols for workplace safety being ignored, big dangerous stunt performances, a resistance to just hire professionals to do that stuff. There are also clashes sometimes among staff because of functional role confusion. Some employees told Time one woman in charge of HR, but the woman's spokesperson told them she's not head of HR, she's not considered the HR person. Time interviewed past Mr. Beast employees, of which there are now hundreds, did not say any of them said Jimmy Donaldson himself was responsible for bullying, but the work environment overall was deemed kind of toxic and everyone felt a constant sense of competition with each other. But he wants them to view themselves as pals, not just colleagues. So he's actually bought tons of property in this part of North Carolina. So there's a Mr. Beast neighborhood, basically, in North Carolina for his employees and families. As of recording time, he still has holdout houses he's hoping to convince people to vacate, and more employees could move in. He spent millions, literal millions, to do that. New hires for either his show or Feastables, his snack food company, they get nice salaries and decent housing, at least for the first 3 months. They've got to prove they have what it takes to stick around longer. So yeah, a lot of parallels to the startup mentality. Give them an initial investment and see what they do with it. What I've been thinking about is Mr. Beast happy? Are his employees happy? And I think a really wonderful, thought-provoking quote is from Jewel. She said, quote, "Happiness is different than excitement. Excitement and perk-driven culture becomes addictive in nature and creates excitement," unquote. Excitement and happiness are not the same thing. Mr. Beast shows his YouTube videos where people do a bunch of crazy stunts and go on adventures with money not an object. That's exciting stuff. Is that happy stuff? Maybe not as often. Are his employees excited all the time? Probably. That's not happiness. People who go to Vegas want to make a living as a startup founder, the Howard Hugheses of the world, the biohackers, Tony Hsieh, renovators of all kinds. All these people are trying to gin up excitement. That's what they're succeeding at. Excitement. That is not the same as happiness. I think happiness comes in part from stupidity, a chance to just be silly, nonsensical, childlike. David Figler, a Vegas lawyer, told the Vegas Review-Journal, quote, "No one is allowed to call any idea stupid in Vegas. We built the city on stupid, and it is the smartest thing we ever did," unquote. It was interesting because as I was reading about so much for this series of episodes, I came across the word stupid multiple times from multiple sources. One story about the dot-com era parties featured a quote, "In America, we do things until it's absolutely at the stupidest, most absurd level," unquote. And Mr. Beast said, quote, "I've reinvested everything to the point if you could claim stupidity, just believing that we would succeed, and it's worked out," unquote. Stupid amounts of money, stupid amounts of fun, stupid amounts of stuff. Maybe that's a key ingredient of excitement more than happiness. So happiness and excitement are different. Stupidity might be part of excitement more than happiness. Another thing to consider, happiness people try so hard to quantify. Tony actually once asked Nick from his shoe site pitching days, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy he was. Later, Nick recalled to the journalist Amy Groth, he kept, quote, "thinking about that stupid number all night," unquote. He just felt preoccupied then with, well, am I a 7? Am I an 8? How am I doing right now? And he was overthinking it. Then he wasted the precious present moment thinking about this. Andrew Solomon writes in The Pursuit of Happiness, quote, "While being optimistic reduces stress, trying to be optimistic can increase it. The notion that positive thinking is correlated with good health puts enormous pressure on people to cleave to beliefs that they don't actually trust. Someone develops cancer, and everyone around her tries to encourage good moods. It makes for a terrible sense of failure. And if she tries to be positive and gets sicker anyway, the tendency is for her to feel guilty, somehow culpable for the degeneration," unquote. Amy Groth summed it up in her book as happiness is, quote, "about commitment and staying true to your values and the people you love. That's it. Chasing after it is the surest way that it will remain elusive," unquote. Indeed, if people just gave up the fight, stopped trying to be happy and let happiness come to them, they might find it in surprising places. I mean, our worst moments make us cherish the present the most. We then have a sense we're gripped with of, whoa, this time is precious, this life is precious, cherish every moment. And grief, bad experiences, are what triggered that gratitude. Whereas if you're trying to be happy, you don't have gratitude. You're practicing a fake emotion as opposed to dealing with a real negative emotion that ironically produces a happier you who's worked through it. Tony once made a list of things that made him happy, trying to reflect on times he was the happiest. Trick-or-treating with friends, connecting with a friend to talk until the sun came up, and times he was creative and inventive. It never had to do with money, and it often had to do with relationships, connecting with other people. He also listed conclusions he had come to of what happiness is all about. Perceived control, perceived progress, connectedness to others, and being part of something bigger than yourself. Interesting, both the constant mentions of connections, relationships, which speaks to the irony of the self-improvement, the self-help book focus of happiness, like you're really trying to just bring it to yourself as an individual, when, like that Buddhist quote says, if you focus on lighting other people's fires, you just spread the happiness, you don't whittle away your own candle. Like Tony said, you wanted to be the greenhouse where everyone flourished, a facilitator of good vibes, not a hogger of them. Tal Ben-Shahar, who has taught classes on happiness studies and wrote the book called Happier, said, quote, "One of the common barriers to happiness is the false expectation that one thing will bring us eternal bliss. While all these things can contribute to our well-being, at best they form a small part of the mosaic of a happy life. A happy or happier life is rarely shaped by some extraordinary life-changing event. Rather, it is shaped incrementally, experience by experience, moment by moment," unquote. One more interesting quote about this is from Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Happiness Hypothesis. "I don't believe there is an inspiring answer to the question, what is the purpose of life? Yet by drawing on ancient wisdom and modern science, we can find compelling answers to the question of purpose within life." The final version of the happiness hypothesis is that happiness comes from between. Happiness is not something that you can find, acquire, or achieve directly. You have to get the conditions right and then wait. Some of these conditions are within you. Other conditions require relationships to things beyond you. If you get these relationships right, a sense of purpose and meaning will emerge, unquote. So notable about Tony's lists of what makes him happy are not just the focus on relationships, but the fact it's a list. It's not one thing. It's a bunch of things. It's the yin and yang. It's the personal sense of taking on a new challenge, dreaming big, and it's seeing like you're part of something bigger. Which is what all these stories have to do with ultimately. People are left spiraling when they're pursuing a high on nitrous oxide, for example, or when they try to blindly follow a leader, like in that commune. They fail at happiness, truly, because they focused entirely on the collective at risk of themselves, without themselves individually. Or they sacrifice the collective to try to personally improve. So these least happiest people seem to be ones who didn't get the balance right. The Park City, Utah origin story. That was a group of people with a collective and individual sense of purpose, impact, connection. That has led to such low turnover today, staff commitment to the Cirque Lodge in Park City today. At places like Zappos, they felt like they were helping out the customers and prioritizing their own silly fun. The dot-com party scene. Those people might have been feeling excited, more than happy, because their startups were not prioritizing employee happiness and their own. Just the owners, just the founders' ideals, or they weren't sharing the joy and wealth, maybe like they could have. The biohackers of the world, people who want to live forever, they're forgetting the collective community that could bring them more joy if they didn't spend their present moments preoccupied with prolonging the future ones. I found Tony Hsieh's story so worth really dissecting for many reasons, all going back to the nature of happiness, how elusive it is, how you can't force it, but it will come. We feel like we're giving it up if we stop pursuing it. That's not how it works. Letting go will allow it to come back to you. Tony's story touches on so much. It touches on the craving we have to belong, to feel purposeful, and he definitely had that feeling, which probably contributed to some hostility towards his brother and his brother's success. Mimi and Susie, people duking it out for commissions, they were fighting really over a deeper desire to feel more valued than the other. The holacracy seems to break down when the people in that system don't strike the right balance between personal and collective fulfillment. Achieving personal and collective fulfillment is a particularly tricky goal when you are autistic, because we go through life observing and trying to quantify everything about people and the world. So we have an extra hard time grasping and sitting with thoughts like, this isn't black and white, and this is going to be unpredictable at times. It's harder for us to let go than it is for neurotypical people. I hope you not just reflect on what is driving your excitement versus happiness and how your view of happiness could encapsulate both you and a greater community to which you want to be a part. Besides expanding your view of what happiness is and your willingness to see it in little accumulating things, besides viewing happiness as incremental and maybe constant if you look around, I highly encourage you to remember Tony Hsieh and his views about life, the desire to make the good vibes spread, and ultimately how he ends his book. Quote, I don't have all the answers, but hopefully I've succeeded in getting you to start asking yourself the right questions, unquote.